Okay, module number 6. So as an organization, as part of the strategy that the organization must consider are its stakeholders. Now, I've been mentioning stakeholders most of the morning, and there are different types of stakeholders. There are various stakeholders that the organization must consider, right? And so we're going to look at that. And module number 6, we're going to be talking about the business stakeholders. So in this module, we're going to learn what a business stakeholder is. We're going to understand the different types of business stakeholders. We're going to learn how to identify, potential business stakeholders, ascertain the stakeholders' expectation. What do they want from us as an organization? We're going to learn the principles of communicating with stakeholders, and then understand about corporate social responsibility. CSR is huge in today's business environment. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that and understand the importance of it. Right? So a stakeholder. What's a business stakeholder? Quite simply, it's people or organization with a legitimate interest in a given situation or action or enterprise. Right? It's anyone with a legitimate interest. Right? They've got skin in the game. They've got interest in a given situation, action, or enterprise. The stakeholder theory is quite simple. Organizational management is largely influenced by opinions, perspectives of internal and external stakeholder. A stakeholder, quite simply stated, is any group, individual, or community that is impacted by the operations of an organization and is thereby granted a voice in how that organization functions. So if what an organization does impacts me as an individual, I'm considered a stakeholder, right? Because I have a right to have a voice because their actions may impact me, right? And there are different types of stakeholders, and that's the stakeholder theory. So here they are. Here's a few of them. And they're divided up into internal and external stakeholders. Now, the first thing I notice is that the internal stakeholders are not as many. However, the external stakeholders are many, right? So, internal stakeholders, you have employees, of course. Your employees are impacted by what the organization does. Managers, owners, right, or shareholders. External could be suppliers, society as a whole, the government. What about your creditors? If your organization is financed, what about shareholders? I guess owners are different than shareholders, but shareholders, each person has a share of stock. They have a voice in the company. And of course, and most importantly, customers are impacted by the organization's operations and their decisions. Types of shareholder groups, stakeholders, types of stakeholder groups. Stakeholders are people who are affected by the firm's performance and who have claims on its performance. Capital market stakeholders, of course, are shareholders. Major suppliers. Product market shareholders are stakeholders. I keep saying shareholders. Stakeholders. Primary customers, suppliers. Host communities. Unions. I don't know if you have unions here, but unions are also a stakeholder. Organizational stakeholders, as we mentioned, employees, managers, and non-managers, right? If you work in the organization. So customers. Customers are a stakeholder. What's their stake? Well, their stake are the product, the service, quality, and the value, right? If an organization has a product that is being bought, being used by the public, then the public is a stake. They have a stake. And many would argue that the business exists only to serve the customers. Customers are actually stakeholders of the business in that they are impacted by the quality of service. I just read a news report. A restaurant served some food, and the food was bad, made everyone sick. Those customers are stakeholders. So the organization has to answer to the customer. For example, passengers traveling on an airplane literally have their lives in the company's hands while flying on the airplane, right? Amazon's, one of their values is customer obsession, because customer is their main stakeholder. Number two, employees. What's the employee's stake? Well, the employees are worried about their employment, their income, and their safety, right? Employees have a direct stake in what the company does. They depend on the nature of the business. Employees may also have health and safety interests, for example, transportation, mining, oil and gas, construction. So employees are directly impacted by what the organization does. And so they have a huge stake. Number three, what about investors? Well, investors are stakeholders. What is their stake? Their stake are financial returns, right? They want to make sure that the organization is making good decisions so that their money is protected and that they get a return on the capital that they've invested, right? Investors are commonly concerned about the concept of shareholder value, right? They want to make sure that the money that they've invested is not only being protected, but increases in value, right? Lumped in with this group are also providers of capital, such as lenders and different classes of shareholders, right? So lenders are lumped in there. So investors have a stake in what the organization does. Number four, suppliers and vendors. What's their stake? Revenue and safety, right? If an organization is buying supplies from a supplier, you better believe that supplier wants to make sure that the organization is going to be in business because that organization is their number one customer. So they have a huge stake. They want to be able to sell goods and services to the business, right? They rely on the revenue generated from those ongoing sales. In many industries, suppliers have their health and safety on the line as they're directly involved in the company's operations, right? So suppliers and vendors also are known as stakeholders. What about number five, communities? What's their stake? Health, safety, and economic development. I want to make sure before this chemical plant moves next door to me that they aren't going to be, releasing these dangerous chemicals. They're going to, harm me and my family. Also, if they move into the neighborhood, I want to make sure they're going to be giving jobs to those in the neighborhood. So economic development. So communities are a major stakeholder in large businesses. They are widely impacted by the things that the organization does, such as job creation, economic development, and of course, health and safety. When a company enters and exits a small community, that community immediately feels the effects, the impact of that organization. In some industries, there's potential health impact as well as companies may alter the environment, right? So this is why when these industrial companies move into a neighborhood, they've got to get all kind of permits and they've got to make all kind of promises that they are not going to impact the community, which are their stakeholders. Number six, the government. What's the government's stake? What does the government want? Taxes. They want to make sure that the revenue being produced is going to be coming through their state, and of course they're a stakeholder, a major stakeholder, because they collect taxes not only from the company but from the employees that work within the company, payroll taxes. The government benefits from the overall gross domestic product. So if that company is located in that community, all the money they're making is coming through that community, which raises the value of that community and the income in that community. So the government definitely has a stake in what the organization does. So they are a stakeholder as well, right? So stakeholder management. So we've got all these stakeholders. The question is, how do we manage all those relationships? We know relationships are very, very difficult to manage anyway. It's crucial. It's a crucial component to successfully delivering on any project or program or activity. In a nutshell, stakeholder management comprises of 4 steps. First, you want to identify, recognize, and acknowledge who your stakeholder is. Number 2, you want to determine their influence and interests. Maybe the stakeholder you have doesn't have a lot of power. Maybe the stakeholder you have has a lot of power. And if they do, you need to know about it. Number 3, you want to establish a communication management plan. Have a way, a method, a process where you're interacting, you're updating with those stakeholders so that they know what's going on. And number 4, and very, very important, you want to have a way that you can influence and engage that stakeholder, right? If the stakeholder is calling all the shots, it can directly and significantly impact your operation and the decisions you're trying to make to take your operations, right? So you've got to manage those relationships. Number 1, identifying your stakeholder. You've got to know who the people and organizations are that affect the work that you do. May have the power to either block or advance. So those stakeholders, if you don't know who they are, they can block your permit or block you from moving forward. Some may be interested, others may not even care. So those that want to be involved, you want to know who they are, and then you want to engage them and keep them updated. Number 2, prioritizing stakeholders. As they would say, all stakeholders are not made the same. You want to prioritize. You want to know which stakeholders are aligned with you, which stakeholders have the power and the influence, and which stakeholders that you can influence and negotiate trade-offs. Stakeholders may be mapped out of power interest grid, and you'll see what that looks like in just a moment. Classified by their power and interest, but you want to know who they are, and you want to group them in terms of priority. Those that have a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of impact, top of the list. Those that are not as interested, don't care, don't have a lot of power, okay, fine. They're sort of quiet investors. You may not need to worry too much about them, right? And here's the power grid that I was just talking about. Very, very important model here. You categorize them in A, B, C, or D categories, right? So you got levels of interest and you got power. So you got one category of stakeholders. They have low levels of interest and they have low levels of power. They're category A. Don't have to worry too much about them. They don't have much power. They don't want to be involved. Category B, well, they have high interest. However, they have low power. So with them, if they have high interest, what you want to do at a minimum is to keep them informed. Keep them informed of what's going on. Newsletters, emails, whatever that might be. Category C, well, this group, they have high power. However, very low interest. They got a lot of stock, a lot of influence, but they don't really care. They're really hands off. They let you run your operations. They don't get in your way. They could if they wanted to, but they don't get in your way. And what you want to do for this category of stakeholder is simply keep them satisfied. If they contact you, they need something, you're on top of it. You address it. You give them assistance. The last category is the one that you prioritize to the top. These are the stakeholders that have high interest and high power. This category of stakeholder are what you refer to as a key player. These are the folks you want to pay attention to. You want to keep them informed, involved, and satisfied because they are a key player and they have authority to either approve, slow down, or reject any request that you might want to make and to take your organization in. Right? So using this matrix, here's how you can prioritize the different stakeholders as an organization and know who's who. Right? So communicating with stakeholders. So once you know who they are, how do you communicate with them? Different stakeholders have different interests and attitudes and priorities. We just saw from the matrix that different stakeholders have different power and interest level to be involved. Effective communication ensures that they receive information, relevant information that they need, and we want you to be able to build a positive impression of your company toward these stakeholders. Stakeholders must understand what you're trying to achieve. Communication with employees, labor unions, they're all stakeholders, all very, very important. Communication with investors and shareholders help you attract new funding, right? So the more you communicate, you need more funding because you're keeping everyone in the loop. There are no surprises. You may be able to get more funding. But communicating with your stakeholders in some way, shape, or form often is going to be key to keeping their buy-in. Right? If your plans change in business and it impacts the local community or your employees, communication. You want everyone to know what's going on. You want to create influence and positive relationship. You do that only through communication. If they only hear from you when something is wrong, right? They should hear from you a lot more frequently than that. Press releases, interviews with journalists, meetings with interest groups, to build an understanding ensures that communication is ongoing. So there's different ways, different paths, different methods for you to communicate and to keep the dialogue open when you're working with your stakeholders. So building dialogue, you want to set up forums, invite forms of feedback. You can get a better understanding of your stakeholders' interests, what's important to them. You can use forums such as social media to communicate and respond critical comments. You can communicate through social media to spread the messages back and forth, to hear attitudes, to sort of gauge the impression of your organization. This is how you build dialogue. Influencing the sources of power. Your communication should focus on stakeholders with the greatest influence on your success. So again, looking at the matrix, those stakeholders with high power and high interest, you want to be communicating with them frequently and often. If the government agency or industry regulators are considering legislation that could cause a problem for your business, you want to be in those meetings. You want to make sure that they understand how this new regulation could impact your business, which could impact the community, which could impact many different things. So you want to be in those meetings giving your point of view in terms of how it's going to impact their decisions, how their decisions will impact you. That's how you influence. So stronger stakeholder relationships, as we mentioned, communicating regularly. Strong relationships brings a range of benefits, gives you more options, more flexibility, gives you the power to negotiate. Communicating customers can put you in a strong position when customers are making purchasing decisions. Really communicating does one thing more than anything. It builds trust between the organization and the stakeholder, which is very, very important. Supplier communication can help you build a good supply chain, align for your needs. Maybe your supplier will give you material at a lower cost. Maybe your supplier will give you material earlier than your competitors, which will put you at an advantage. Shareholder communication can give you an easier access to funds as well. So communication. Number 4, engaging your stakeholders. This is a really simple model. So we just said earlier, you want to identify and assess who your stakeholders are. Identify who they are and kind of see where they are on that grid. Develop an engagement plan. How are you going to engage them? What techniques are you going to use? Forums, internet, magazine. You want to implement your engagement plan once you have it in place, execute on it. You want to assess the progress. How did we do? Did you make good contacts? Did you not hear back from anyone? Respond to the engagement results. If you have a negative impression in the community about your organization, you want to know what that is and do some mitigation to fix that. Measure the report progress once you make those changes. And then you start from the beginning. Set your engagement objectives as you go along there. So you repeat the process as you go along, but this is continual. This is not a one-time event. This is something you're going to be doing, hopefully, on a regular basis. Why stakeholder engagement is important to strategic direction? Well, it includes formal and informal ways a company stays connected with its stakeholders. It has the ability to influence the success or failure of the company at various levels. Stakeholder engagement, it helps to build relationships with stakeholders to better understand your concerns, your perspectives. Those concerns or perspectives helps the company achieve its corporate strategy, right? So you want to give your point of view. Again, just as your employees are important, so are government regulators, so is the local community, so are lenders, so are suppliers. You want everyone on your side helping you to achieve your strategic direction, right? The entrepreneur, the organization cannot do it alone. Everyone has stakeholders. Okay, this is a new one, a very popular thing that's occurring in the community. Well, I guess it's not so new. It's been going on now for the last couple of years. It's called corporate social responsibility. And I tell you, one of the greatest benefits of it is that it gets your name out and it generates goodwill for the organization. What is it? Well, it's the organization's obligation to consider interests of its customers, employees, shareholders, and communities. Basically integrates corporate social responsibility, business processes into its ultimate goal. So you'll be doing things like feeding the hungry, maybe trash cleanups on beaches, different things in the community that impacts the community, that shows that you are being socially responsible, that you're caring about the local community. By taking advantage of this strategic approach, these activities help to devote to the organization being socially responsible and will strengthen the organization's impression to the local community, right? By planning these CRE events, the overall plan, organization can ensure profits are increasing shareholder value that don't overshadow the need to behave ethically by their stakeholders. So this shows them clearly that you're trying to do more in the community than just making money, right? And again, most organizations today have some type of CSR or corporate social responsibility program. It helps with balancing the creation of value with societal value, because if a company is all about making money and they do nothing as it relates to giving back, that can be viewed as negative in the local community. It helps with managing stakeholder relationships, especially those with competing values. It helps with responding to threats and opportunities facing the stakeholders. It helps to develop a sustainable business practice. It also helps to decide the organization's capacity for philanthropic activities. Philanthropic just talks about giving money away to schools, to hospitals, to charity organizations. That's all part of the organization's corporate social responsibility. So in essence, the idea is if the organization is in the community, if it's making money while in the community, society says that organization should give back to that community and to those in the community, right? So types of CSR, as I mentioned, environmental sustainability efforts, limiting pollution or eliminating pollution, reducing greenhouse gases. For example, Cisco Systems is taking a number of steps to reduce their carbon footprint, and they've involved installing photo systems at their production facilities, direct philanthropic giving, a donation, basically giving money, giving time, volunteering resources to charities. Donations can be to many different worthy causes, human rights causes, natural disaster causes. Whenever there's a natural disaster, companies will make a big announcement that they've given $1 million, $2 million. What are they doing? They're communicating to their stakeholders. We're being philanthropic. We're giving back. We care about our community. That's a CSR activity. Microsoft, Bill Gates. Bill Gates is donated billions of dollars through the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation to support the eradication of diseases and also education, right? Ethical business practices. This is another type of CSR. Fair businesses. Companies now are saying, hey, we want to pay everyone a fair wage, no matter, the employee, no matter where they live, no matter where they're from. Every employee deserves a living wage. And so companies are doing different CSR events along those lines. Something called ethical labor practices for their suppliers. For instance, Ben & Jerry ice cream uses fair trade certified ingredients, meaning that their suppliers all must have a program in place where their employees are paid a living wage, right? So they ensure that no sugar, cocoa, vanilla, coffee, or bananas go into their ingredients if it comes from a supplier that's not doing right by their employees. Economic responsibility. So this focuses on long-term business, meeting the standards, the ethical, environmental, and philanthropic practices, balancing economic decisions with overall society. An example is economic. You're giving back to the local schools. You're making sure that all your employees have time off. You're buying your material from local suppliers, right? So you're spreading the wealth around in terms of economic responsibility. In summary, very short chapter, but I think now you know what a stakeholder is. A stakeholder is anyone, any group, any individual that is impacted by an organization's decision. And so we looked at what stakeholders are. We looked at the different types of stakeholders. I love the model that we looked at where we grouped the different stakeholders, which one had power, which one didn't have power. We looked at the expectations of stakeholders, what each stakeholder needs, and they're all different. And of course, the last thing we looked at is corporate social responsibility that most organizations are involved in. So, short chapter, we're making some very good time. So this concludes chapter number 6, and now we're moving to chapter number 7.